Now, there have been many deliberations over Shimla Agreement since 1972. Several views have been expressed on the issue, including ones by General Manekshaw, who has said that he viewed the treaty as firmly against India's interests. And there are several other views, both for and against the provisions of the treaty. Now, to understand the situation better, I wanted to understand, and our viewers would like to know, what was India truly aiming to achieve at Shimla? Because at the very least, it was a bilateral negotiation between India and Pakistan. And what was the final agreement that we had? Was it the best possible outcome that India could have, or we could have achieved something more out of it?
Well, to begin with, let's go back to 1965. The war in 1965 was a long, festering war.
Yeah.
And how did the war end? If we remind ourselves, we find that it ended with third-party intervention. The Soviet Union, the Canadians, the United Kingdom, of course, the United States, they all were active in playing some role or the other. So for the first time, in 1971, India found a position where it could say that this is a new normal. Yeah. A new country has been created in the region, and Pakistan was not going to conduct itself as it did before by rushing to the United States. Right. So here was a situation where the Indians said that, look, we will set the board for future negotiations, and here you agree to deal with us bilaterally. So for the first time, Shimla Agreement, what it does is that it establishes that new normal. After 1971, this is a new strategic neighborhood, and this is the reality of this neighborhood, that what we say as the victors in this particular war, you have to agree to it.
Right.
And what is the first thing? Here is the line of ceasefire line, exactly. Rather of December 1971, right. And you have to turn that ceasefire line into a line of control. And you see, this is again, a first-time development. Something like this hadn't happened between India and Pakistan in 1965 or in, say, 1948.
1948 also.
Now, this is the first time that India was setting the rules for the region.
Right.
Now, here were these outcomes that were to be achieved. Pakistan also wanted something. It wanted its 94,000 soldiers to be repatriated.
Right.
So India had to hand over those soldiers. And again, India said very carefully that, well, we'll talk to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and we'll see if we can hand them over to you. And the other thing was that in terms of the regional game plan, India created a zone for its own. That this is India's area, this is India's neighborhood. Right. And everything that will happen now onwards will have to take into consideration what India thinks. Now, if you say that what was really the weakest point of that agreement was that it is more or less implicit in that agreement that as if Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto were going to be in power forever. Now, longevity of a treaty or an agreement, especially after a big conflict, depends on how solidly the two states trust the agreement. And Pakistan, throughout the successive decades, continued to emphasize about the Kashmir issue and the UN resolutions, going all the way back to 1940s and 1950s. So therefore, India keeps reminding Pakistan that the Kashmir is a bilateral dispute, and Pakistan continues to remind India that it is not really going to be bound by the Shimla Agreement anymore.
They have revoked it even.
Of course, that revocation is the latest move, but the fact is that ultimately the two big leaders were projected as the ultimate authorities, whereas they don't. No leader really survives for eternity. But then here are these two states which are now dealing with the legacy of that era.
But so you talked about the Kashmir issue. Would it have been possible for India to have say, stronger emphasis on resolving the Kashmir issue? Because after the Shimla Agreement, the only battle that we lost in all of 1971 was the Battle of Cham. And while India did keep a lot of forward outposts that we had captured during the war, a majority of the land that we had captured was given back, and including strategically important places. So do you think that India was in a position to get these areas back as well and maybe work towards a more stable solution for Kashmir?
Well, the goal of the war or that conflict was liberation of East Pakistan.
Right.
That was the trigger for the conflict. And therefore, that goal was achieved by the 13-day war. And the other goal of Indira Gandhi was that Pakistan, especially whatever remains of Pakistan on the western side, should not be disturbed to a degree that would attract Western intervention. Because as we discussed earlier, that Pakistan was a member of SEATO and CENTO. So if Pakistan's existence, the Western Pakistan's existence was in jeopardy or in doubt, then that sort of a situation would have attracted an all-out response from the Americans. And Indira Gandhi was quite clear and determined to prevent that from happening.
Right.
So therefore, when we talk about Kashmir, especially since it was not a war for Kashmir,
Exactly.
it was a war for liberation of East Pakistan.
Yeah.
And that goal was attained. And therefore, they did not want to escalate it on the Western Front. And it was basically Pakistan's dream to escalate it on the Western Front so that India would fight a two-pronged war, a two-front war, where the Americans would come rushing to Pakistan's rescue.